Okay, so let's dive right in. Our focus today, it actually starts with a fall, a literal fall,
Right.
but not a person falling, an object.
A notebook.
Just a notebook. Black, plain, looks like nothing special, really.
Exactly. And yet, this thing falling out of the sky, it becomes this vessel, right, for immense power, almost godlike power, as the source puts it.
And the really interesting thing, the way our source material frames it, is how this, like, totally ordinary-looking thing lands in a world that's already, well, it's complicated, ethically speaking. Lots of gray areas.
Uh-huh. And the notebook just immediately throws all that complexity into really sharp, brutal focus. No more hiding in the gray.
So the story we're digging into today, all kicked off by this one object, is Death Note. And this deep dive, just so you know, it's not really about summarizing the plot. We're going on more of a philosophical journey, an ethical one.
Yeah, and we're using a very specific guide for that journey. It's an essay called Death Note, Power, Morality, and Humanity by you, Jerry.
Totally. Right. And as G is described as an author, a cultural bridge builder, and a leadership visionary. So you can tell this isn't just a surface-level take.
Definitely not. The essay approaches Death Note from this really poetic angle, very personal, but also deeply philosophical. It's trying to get at the core arguments, the questions that kind of stick with you.
So our mission here is to use that essay, E's perspective, as our map, really, to unpack the big themes, the key players, and, yeah, those uncomfortable questions that Death Note just forces you to think about.
Exactly. It's less about analyzing the narrative beats and more about, like the essay suggests, exploring it as this big thought experiment told through a story.
And why should this matter to you, listening right now? Well, the essay presents Death Note not just as some cool story, but as a mirror.
A mirror, yeah. Reflecting maybe our own society's anxieties or desires, maybe even something buried deep down in ourselves.
That impulse, maybe, for quick justice, for consequences to be immediate and absolute. The source hints that maybe we all feel a flicker of that sometimes, especially when we see injustice. So this isn't just about a manga or an anime series that got popular. It's treated as this really potent thought experiment. It makes you grapple with these huge universal questions about justice and power and what's right or wrong.
Yeah, and that line between what you intend to do versus the actual, maybe devastating impact of your actions.
It feels incredibly relevant, maybe even uncomfortably so, navigating the world today.
Well, the essay really suggests that the power of the Death Note isn't just about the magic, right? It hits home because it taps into something internal, a temptation maybe, that's already there in people. So understanding how it all started, how it was created, how people first reacted to it, that helps explain why it became such a huge global thing.
Okay, so let's rewind then. Let's go back to that origin point, the genesis of this notebook falling. The source takes us to Japan, early 2000s. What was that like, according to the essay?
The essay paints this picture of Japan sort of suspended between tradition and technology. You've got school uniforms, but also these soul shadows, as it poetically puts it.
Soul shadows. Interesting.
Yeah. And it highlights the creators. Tsugumi Yusuba, the writer, described as this faceless author with a taste for darkness. Nobody really knows who they are.
Still don't. Right.
Still don't. And Takeshi Obata, the artist, the essay praises his art, saying his lines breathe the unspoken. So you have this combination of hidden depth in the writing and really evocative visuals.
And it first showed up in 2003 in Weekly Shonen Jump. But the essay says it wasn't like this instant blockbuster.
No, exactly. It was born not with a bang, but a whisper. That's the phrase used. But crucially, that whisper grows louder, deeper, sharper over time. It wasn't maybe immediately obvious how big it would become, but it started to really connect with readers pretty quickly. The source notes it particularly resonated with a generation raised on rules, and this story basically dared them to challenge them.
So it wasn't just passive entertainment, it was poking at something.
Definitely. It was an active provocation right from the start.
And the scale. 12 volumes, 108 chapters. That's a substantial story. The essay uses a pretty intense metaphor for it.
Yeah, it calls it a chess match played in hell.
Wow.
Each page moved deliberate, deadly, divine. And that's not just about the plot being complicated. It speaks to the meticulous strategic nature of the conflict. The stakes are incredibly high, almost existential.
So it wasn't just read, it was engaged with.
Totally. The essay says readers didn't just consume it. They had to pause, to think, to question, to feel. That level of demanding engagement from a story is pretty unusual, and it was key to its impact.
That strategic depth, the way it almost forced you to think along with the characters, that must have set the stage for what came later.
Absolutely. You weren't just following along. You were trying to guess the next move, trying to outthink Light or L. And in doing that, you couldn't help but engage with the ethical tightrope they were walking. It prepared people for the deeper moral questions the notebook itself forces.
And then 2006, 3 years later, the anime adaptation hits from Madhouse Studios. The source says this added something new.
It really did. The essay puts it like, what was black and white now pulses with voice and music. Animation brought Obata's incredible art to life, obviously. But the voice acting, the score, it added these layers of atmosphere, tension, things the manga couldn't quite capture alone.
Specific elements.
Yeah, the source mentions the use of shadows, string quartets, and silence. These weren't just background noise. They actively amplified the psychological drama, that sense of dread hanging over everything.
And this version, the anime, really sparked something bigger, didn't it? A cultural wave.
Yeah, a wave the essay describes as not loud but unshakable. It spread way beyond the usual manga anime crowd. It went, as the source says, from students to scholars, forums to philosophy lectures.
Wow.
This is where Death Note really shifted from being just a story to being discourse, a topic of serious discussion.
From a dark tale of a Japanese boy to a global question, that's quite a leap.
It really is. But it speaks to how universal the themes are, right? Justice, power, morality.
Yeah.
These aren't Japanese issues, they're human issues. So the story broke out of its original context because those core questions resonate everywhere. That chess match in hell became a worldwide debate.
So looking back at that early history, it's clear this wasn't just a fluke hit. The careful creation, the intellectual demand it placed on readers, the way the anime amplified the mood, it all built towards this thing that didn't just entertain, it made you think.
It built this foundation of intensity and thematic weight, which it kind of needed, I think, to really grapple with the main event, the notebook itself.
Which brings us right to it, the Death Note. And like you said before, the way the source describes it, it's strikingly normal looking.
That's part of what makes it so unnerving, according to the essay. It's not a spell book, not ancient, not glowing.
Right.
Just a notebook. Black, plain, almost dull.
Right. No mystical aura.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that lack of fanfare makes its power feel almost chillingly accessible, like it could just fall into anyone's hands.
And the core rule. It's so simple and terrifying. The human whose name is written in this notebook shall die. One sentence. Absolute power.
The essay calls that line a curse, a promise, but it also clarifies pretty quickly that it's not just writing a name. There are other rules.
More rules.
Yeah, rules with what the source calls cruel, cold logic. You need a name, a face. You have to picture the person's face as you write so you get the right target.
Okay. Prevents accidental killings, I guess. Or ensures precision.
Precision, yeah. And then you can also specify a time, a cause. You can dictate how and when they die within certain limits.
So it's not just poof, you're dead. It's a toolkit for orchestrating death.
Exactly. The source calls it a toolkit for gods, or those who believe they are. It offers this incredible level of control that's just deeply seductive, especially for someone like Light Yagami, the guy who finds it.
And the essay talks about Light's first interactions with it. He's not reckless, is he? It says he reads, understands, tests.
Yeah, he approaches it like a science experiment almost.
Yeah.
He's meticulous right from the start.
Yeah.
Which is key to his character.
And how does that methodical approach connect to his transformation?
The essay links them directly. It says each name he writes deepens his hunger. But it's not a hunger for blood, not exactly. It's for control, for meaning, for godhood.
Godhood, wow.
He doesn't just stumble into being powerful or become corrupted accidentally. The source is really clear. He embraces godhood. It's a conscious choice. He wants this.
Okay, but what about the notebook itself? You mentioned its passivity. The source really leans into that, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. This is a huge point in the essay. The notebook just obeys, and stays silent. Critically, it never asks why.
No judgment from the tool.
None at all. And that silence, that complete lack of any moral compass within the notebook itself, is profoundly disturbing. Because it means, as the essay states very starkly, morality is not built in. It must come from the user, or vanish entirely.
And that's the real horror, isn't it, according to the source? Not the death, but how easy it becomes.
Yes. One name, one thought, one silence. It strips away all the friction, all the difficulty from the act of killing. It makes it administrative, almost mundane.
That's terrifying.
And the essay points out how seductive that ease can be, especially, in a world that feels plagued by injustice. In that context, the power to just wipe out the bad guys easily, it can feel initially cleansing.
I can see the appeal, that immediate fix.
Right. There's this visceral satisfaction maybe in the idea of eliminating evil so cleanly.
But that feeling doesn't last, does it? The essay immediately counters it with the ethical void it leaves behind.
Exactly. If the tool has no morals, then the questions just explode outwards. But who decides who's worthy of life? Who gets to make that call? Who bears the burden when even gods are mute?
Because the notebook offers no guidance, no justification.
No absolution, nothing. The entire weight, the crushing moral responsibility of judging and executing someone falls squarely on the person holding the pen. And the essay argues that this is what strips away that initial cleansing feeling.
Which brings us back to that central metaphor the essay uses, the mirror.
Maybe the Death Note isn't a tool, maybe it's a mirror, and those who write in it must face what they see.
So it doesn't just give you power, it forces you to confront what you do with that power, your own justifications, your own limits, or lack thereof.
It reflects your true nature, maybe, when you think no one's watching, or when you believe you have the ultimate justification.
So just take a second to think about that, you listening. The simple act, writing a name. How disturbingly easy. Does that make you think about other seemingly small actions, maybe in our own lives or in society, that have huge, maybe unintended consequences?
And that complete lack of built-in morality in the tool, how does that force us to confront our own values, our own capacity for judgment? The essay really puts the burden on the user, and by extension, it makes us, the audience, question where our lines would be.
It's like it externalizes this ultimate temptation, lets us watch someone else grapple with it.
Yeah, watch the internal calculations, the justifications. What happens when someone really gives in to that temptation?
And the people involved in this drama, the ones using the notebook or trying to stop its use, they're far from simple figures. The essay insists they are no heroes, not even anti-heroes. What are they then?
They're reflections fractured between intellect and ideology. That's the key phrase.
Fractured reflections.
Yeah. It stops us from just slapping a good guy or a bad guy label on them. Instead, we see these complex individuals driven by really powerful, often conflicting internal forces. They're intensely human, brilliant, and flawed.
Let's start with the first user, Light Yagami, who becomes Kira. The essay describes him physically. Honor student, hollow eyes. That contrast feels significant.
It really does. Outwardly, he's perfect, right? Top student, seemingly has it all. But those hollow eyes suggest this internal emptiness, this deep dissatisfaction or contempt for the world as it is.
And his motivation. It's not just about wanting justice done.
No, the essay argues it's more profound and more dangerous. He wants to own it. He doesn't just want a just world. He wants to be the source of that justice. He wants to embody it.
So when the essay says he embraces godhood,
it means he deliberately takes on this role. He becomes Kira, which sounds like killer, of course, but in his own mind, he's a savior. He truly believes he's doing the right thing, creating a better world.
This vision of a perfectly clean world, the essay suggests there's a downside, a potential emptiness.
Yeah, it poses this really sharp question about light. Yet those who clean the world must eventually ask, what remains when everything else is gone? It points to the potential sterility, the loss, that comes with such a ruthless pursuit of purity. If you eliminate everyone you deem unworthy, what's left? What about human messiness, diversity, the unpredictable parts of life? The essay implies his vision, however well-intentioned initially, becomes inherently destructive.
And opposing him, his intellectual shadow, is L.
Right, L. The essay paints this vivid picture, barefoot detective in shadows, sweet-toothed, awkward, brilliant. He's Light's opposite in almost every way.
How so?
Well, where Light wants to impose his order, his judgment, L is all about finding the truth. Wherever it leads, however uncomfortable it is. Light judges and condemns. L just relentlessly questions and investigates. Their whole approach is different.
And their clash is really the heart of the story, isn't it? Described as a ballet. Silent, strategic, unforgiving.
It's this intense psychological war, a battle of wits fought with deduction, manipulation, foresight. Every move, every counter move has life or death stakes. Yeah. The essay's description really captures the, intricate, almost beautiful horror of their intellectual duel.
But it's not just those two. The essay highlights other key players who add different dimensions to the moral puzzle, like Misa Amane, described as model, icon, victim.
Misa's story is really tragic. Her motivation isn't ideology, like Light's. The essay says She seeks love. She gets involved with Light out of devotion, not because she shares his grand vision.
Well, she's caught up in it.
Completely. The essay calls her tragic, manipulated, complicit, and painfully aware. She adds this layer of real human vulnerability and consequence to the grand intellectual game being played by Light and L.
And then there are L's successors, Nier and Mello. L's legacy split in two, the essay calls them.
Yeah, they kind of embody different sides of L. Nier is the pure logic, very cool, detached. Mello is all fire, emotional, willing to take huge risks. Ice versus scars, as the essay puts it.
Ice versus scars.
They're the ones who ultimately end the game, bring things to a conclusion. But the essay notes it's not without cost. Their victory isn't clean or simple. The fight leaves its mark.
So again, the essay keeps emphasizing these characters aren't archetypes. Fragments of humanity, none purely good, none fully evil.
Exactly. They all wear their masks, like the perfect student, L the eccentric genius, Misa the bubbly model. But the story pushes them into such extreme situations that it forces those masks to slip. And in watching them, the essay suggests the story is maybe taking ours off in the process.
Making us look beyond our own masks.
Yeah, making us consider our own potential for similar drives, similar flaws, if we were put under that kind of pressure.
So, thinking about these characters, you listening, which one resonates most with you? Or disturbs you most? Whose flaws or motivations feel familiar, maybe? What does seeing these fractured reflections show you about your own views on justice or power or just human nature?
That refusal to give us clear heroes or villains is a big part of the story's lasting power, I think. It forces you to make the judgment calls, and that inevitably leads you to look inward.
Okay, moving beyond the human players, we get these other beings, the Shinigami, the death gods. And the essay presents them not as these grand, terrifying figures, but almost bureaucratic, like they hover over fate like accountants over dusty ledgers.
Yeah, that imagery is deliberately deflating, isn't it? It strips away the divine mystery. Their world is described as colorless, stagnant, dead, and their defining feature, eternal boredom.
Boredom for death gods.
That's the picture. Immense power, but coupled with this profound, soul-crushing ennui.
And it's that boredom that actually kicks the whole story off, with Ryuk dropping the notebook.
Precisely. His motivation isn't good or evil. It's not malice, it's not mercy, it's just curiosity. The essay says he drops it into the human world like a kid tossing a rock into a pond just to see the ripples.
He just wants something interesting to happen.
He's looking for entertainment to break up the monotony of his immortal, boring existence.
So Ryuk isn't really a villain pulling the strings. The source calls him an observer, an addict to chaos.
He's the ultimate neutral catalyst, yeah. He provides the tool, sets the stage for all this human drama and moral chaos, and then just watches with amusement. His appearance, that winged shadow with a twisted grin and a taste for apples, kind of captures that mix of the macabre and the almost frivolous. He finds our struggles interesting.
But the essay points out an exception within this realm of bored gods. Rem.
Rem is different, yeah. She stands out from Ryuk and the others, described as different, quiet, loyal, almost compassionate. She actually seems to feel something.
And she gets involved, doesn't she, to protect Misa. The source says she chooses to care.
And in doing so, she shows something really unexpected for a Shinigami. Even gods of death can love and sacrifice. Her character introduces this sliver of possibility that even these seemingly indifferent beings might have capacity for feeling, for moral choice. The powerful contrast to Ryuk's detachment.
But overall, the essay clarifies the Shinigami's main function. They aren't judges. They provide the tool, not the verdict.
That's crucial. They're just the delivery mechanism for the power. They don't dictate its use. They don't judge the users. They just watch, wait, with wings folded and meaning absent.
So the responsibility, the verdict, that stays entirely with the humans.
Entirely. The Shinigami just divide the stage and maybe watch the play unfold.
And this leads to what the source calls the true horror of the Shinigami. It's not their power.
It's their indifference.
That's chilling.
Yeah, the terrifying idea is that these ultimate forces dealing with mortality, they just don't care. Our struggles, our ideas of justice, our suffering, it means nothing to them. Their power is vast, but totally meaningless in any human sense.
And that indifference sparks this really profound question in the essay. Because if even the gods no longer care, who's left to defend what's human?
It really forces you to confront this idea of a universe maybe without inherent meaning, without any divine safety net. If the ultimate powers are just bored observers, then the job of defining and defending what we value, what's human, that falls entirely on us.
No backup coming from above?
Nope. It's all on us.
Wow, that idea of cosmic indifference, it's heavy. Does thinking about death as just, an administrative task, like shuffling papers in those dusty ledgers, change how you view mortality or fate?
It definitely takes the romance out of it.
Yeah, and that contrast between Ryuk's boredom and Rem's ability to care, does that make you think differently about what existence even means, even for non-human beings?
It adds this whole other layer, doesn't it? An existential weight. It strips away easy answers about divine plans and puts the focus squarely back on human choices and human meaning.
Okay, so given how deep and impactful Death Note was, it's no surprise it's been adapted so many times. But the essay suggests adapting it is tricky, like trying to shine lights on a story that works best in the subtlety of shadows.
Yeah, the essay calls adaptation a tightrope above ethical fire. Because the real core of Death Note isn't just the plot twists, it's those deep, uncomfortable ethical questions, the psychological tension. Just moving the story beats to film or TV risks losing that essential quality.
Losing the whisper, as the essay puts it.
Exactly, replacing that quiet philosophical horror with something louder, maybe more superficially exciting, but ultimately less profound.
So let's look at some of the attempts the essay mentions, the Japanese live-action films from 2006.
Right, 2 films, Death Note and The Last Name. The essay notes their chilly cinematography, stoic acting, and calls them surprisingly faithful.
What was their impact, according to the source?
It argues that because Light and L felt so real in these films, their judgments and the consequences felt heavier, harder. That grounded, realistic tone actually amplified the moral weight of the story.
Then there was that L spin-off film in 2008.
L changed the world. Yeah, the essay sees it as a side story, exploring L as more human, less myth, calls it a footnote, but brave for trying to flesh out L beyond just being Kira's adversary.
And the 2015 Japanese TV drama.
Described as slower, more modern, not perfect, but bold. It took a different approach, using the longer series format to explore the themes, updating the context a bit.
Okay, and then the 2017 Netflix adaptation. The essay doesn't mince words here, does it?
No, it's pretty blunt. Calls it Western, loud, Americanized. Points out the big changes. Light becomes Light Turner. It's set in Seattle. There's a new character, Mia.
And the verdict?
Well, it concedes Ryuk remains creepy.
Okay, something worked.
But the overall assessment is stark. The rest collapses.
Ouch. Why does the essay think it collapsed? Is it just an East versus West thing?
The essay argues no, not necessarily. The problem isn't inherently about adapting Japanese material in the West. It's because Death Note doesn't scream. It whispers. And in translation, we sometimes lose the silence.
The whisper again.
Yeah. The idea is that the story's real power is quiet, insidious. It's in the psychology, the internal debates, the moral dread that hangs in the air. A louder, more action-packed, more overtly dramatic version, which the Netflix film is implied to be, just drowns out that essential quiet horror. It misses the point.
So the essay wraps up this section by saying that all these adaptation attempts prove something.
Every attempt proves one thing. Death Note is not just content. It is a moral minefield, and reenacting it means stepping into ethical fire.
You can't just retell the story. You have to grapple with its ethical core. And that's hard to do well, especially across different formats and cultures.
It really is.
It makes you think, doesn't it? About translating subtle, complex themes. What makes some stories so hard to adapt for you listening? Think about stories you love. What makes them tricky? Does that idea of Death Note's power being in its whisper make sense for why maybe a louder adaptation wouldn't quite capture it?
It really highlights how unique the original's power was, more intellectual, more psychological than just straightforward action or thrills.
Which brings us right to that core, the ethical bombshell. The essay starts by pointing out how deceptively simple the main action is. Writing a name is easy.
Right, but then understanding it harder. Judging it without losing yourself, nearly impossible.
That sets the stage immediately. This isn't just a story, it's a moral obstacle course. The ease of the action hides this massive ethical complexity and danger.
And the essay is really clear. This is not revenge fantasy. It's framed as a thought experiment in ink and blood, a knot of ethics that only tightens.
It takes this ultimate what if you had this power, and follows the implications with this brutal logical intensity. It's not about simple payback, it's about using that power to enforce a personal grand vision of justice.
which the essay argues makes the ethics way more complicated, way harder to untangle.
And the central question it forces on everyone is just unavoidable. If you had the power to kill, would you?
That pulls you right in, doesn't it? Makes it personal, forces you to confront the hypothetical directly.
Light's answer, of course, is a definite yes. But the essay stresses it's not out of anger, but belief.
Right. His goal is huge. A new world. Clean, strong, just. But then the crucial part. But his version of just.
His version. That's the key.
Absolutely. His belief in his own righteousness is total. No room for doubt, no room for other perspectives. His idea of justice becomes the only one that matters, and he's willing to kill repeatedly to enforce it. He becomes, as the essay implies, the sole judge, jury, and executioner.
And in doing this, he becomes a symbol. The essay notes people see him very differently. To some, a hero. To others, a tyrant.
And that split mirrors the debate the story sparks in the audience, right? You're forced to wrestle with how easily good intentions, especially when mixed with absolute power and conviction, can lead down a path to tyranny.
The essay then lists some specific, really tough questions the story throws at us. Let's touch on those. First, justice. Real or always relative?
Yeah, if Kira's justice is just defined by his power to make it happen, does that mean justice itself is just whatever the powerful say it is? Or is there some objective standard he's violating? The story forces you to think about the foundation of justice itself.
Okay, next. Power. Does it reveal us or ruin us?
Does the Death Note just peel back the layers and show a darkness or a god complex that was already inside Light? Or is the power itself so immense that it fundamentally changes and corrupts him? Nature versus nurture, almost, but with ultimate power.
Capital punishment. Can humans wield death justly?
This gets amplified hugely here, right? It's not a state system with appeals and procedures, however flawed those might be. It's one person deciding who dies, instantly, with no recourse. Can any human or any human system really be trusted with that?
Surveillance. Is safety worth freedom?
Because Kira's actions create this atmosphere of fear, which leads to more surveillance, less freedom, all in the name of catching him. So the story makes you weigh that trade-off. How much liberty are you willing to give up for perceived safety from criminals or from Kira himself?
And the last one highlighted. God complex. When does righteousness become delusion?
Light genuinely believes he's making things better. He thinks his actions are morally right. The question is, where's the line? When does that intense conviction tip over from purpose into this dangerous, self-serving delusion that blinds him to the horror of what he's actually doing?
And after posing all these incredibly difficult questions, the essay makes it clear.
Death Note offers no answers, only questions.
It doesn't tell you what to think. It's not a simple morality play.
No, it's a catalyst. It sparks debate, forces personal reflection. And those questions, the essay says, they stick around. They keep echoing through classrooms, comment sections, and conscience long after the story's over.
Because as the source concludes this section with that chilling line, the line between hero and executioner is razor thin.
A deeply unsettling thought. That gap between savior and tyrant can be terrifyingly narrow. Maybe just a matter of perspective, or who happens to be holding the pen.
And that right there is where it becomes really potent for you, the listener. These aren't just abstract points about some anime. Which of these questions feels most alive, most urgent in your world right now? Where do you see that razor-thin line playing out? In politics, technology, social issues, maybe even closer to home?
The genius of the story, as the essay breaks it down, is how it translates these massive ethical dilemmas into this really gripping, high-stakes narrative that you just can't ignore.
It's not just plot. It's that uncomfortable mirror again.
Exactly. Holding it up to us, to society, to human nature itself.
So we've gone through all this, the notebook's fall, the chilling rules, the dance of the characters, the indifferent gods, the tricky adaptations, these huge ethical knots. Why does Death Note stick around? Why do some stories fade while others, like the essay says, burn into memory?
The essay argues Death Note is definitely in that second category. And it's not because it's loud or flashy. It endures because it's quietly terrifying.
Quietly terrifying.
Yeah, the horror is subtle. It's psychological. It's ethical. And that kind of horror sinks in deeper, stays with you longer than maybe gore or jump scares would.
And also because, as the essay puts it, it poses all the wrong questions. Or perhaps the right painful ones.
The ones we often try to avoid, right? About good and evil, about power corrupting, about the limits of our own judgment. The essay suggests that because it makes us uncomfortable, it feels necessary.
Let's just quickly revisit a couple of those core questions the essay says make it endure. What if power doesn't corrupt, but reveals?
suggesting maybe power just removes the filters, takes away the consequences, and shows you who a person truly was all along.
And that other chilling idea. What if the true horror lies not in death, but in the right to decide?
Shifting the focus from the outcome, death, to the act of judgment itself, the immense, terrifying burden and the potential for abuse that comes with holding the power of life and death.
So the essay basically concludes that Death Note lasts because it refuses to be easy.
Yeah, you can't neatly categorize it. You can't find simple answers. Its characters are not heroes. We talked about that. Its gods are not clean. They're bored or indifferent. And maybe most powerfully, it's silence louder than most shouts.
The gaps, the unsaid things, the ethical void that speaks volumes.
Definitely.
And in today's world, with constant information, hot takes flying everywhere, endless scrolling, the essay paints Death Note as standing apart, like a monolith, unshapely, uncomfortable, necessary.
It's demanding. It asks you to engage, to think deeply, to sit with discomfort. It pushes back against passive consumption. Its uncomfortable nature is actually its strength.
And the final reminder it leaves us with, according to the essay, it's stark.
It reminds us, the line between good and evil may be nothing more than a name, a thought, a stroke of ink.
Wow. Bringing those huge philosophical ideas right down to the simplest, most terrifyingly accessible action, just writing something down.
Exactly.
So we took on quite a journey today, really digging into the world and the ideas of Death Note, using that insightful essay by Etchu as our guide.
We've talked about the notebook falling, its cold rules, the intricate dance of Light and L and the others, those detached Shinigami, the difficulty of adapting something so subtle, and those massive ethical questions that just don't go away.
Yeah, we've seen how the essay really frames it all as that mirror reflecting society, reflecting us, forcing us to confront these really tough truths about justice and power and what it even means to be human when you have that kind of unchecked authority.
And as the story ends, as that final name is written, or maybe not written, there's this one last question the essay leaves hanging in the air, a question that lingers long after the credits roll.
What if the Death Note was in your pocket right now?